Welcome to the SEB Society for Ethnobotany Student Cafes. This is a series of cafes where students invite professions in different areas of research, especially in ethnobotany, to guide and mentor students who do research in ethnobotany and botany in general. So this is our series for this month. Watch out for next month. We'll have another one. And we also encourage, especially students, never to miss this. And if you've missed the previous one, we have recordings. Check on our website, check on our YouTube. They are there. They are very exciting. So another one, registration for Society for Ethnobotany is still ongoing for members and also for students. Students have a subscribed amount of registration. It's cheaper for us. So you're all welcome to the society, but more especially to the student cafes. And this one today, it's a special one because our guest is the president for Society for Ethnobotany. She is Professor Heike Vibrans. She is original from German, where she did a PhD in natural science from the University of Bonn, but currently she's a resident of Mexico. She is a full professor and researcher at College of Postgraduate in Mexico, where she teaches and does research on ethnobotany and economic botany. And she also has interests in ethnobotany and of course in especially the uses and economics of traditional agriculture, domestication, and wild resources and home gardens. She is also interested in biogeography, taxonomy, and also evolution of weeds. She has done 72 papers, publications, of which 41, she is the first author. She has authored 2 books, 14 book chapters, and she's made several contributions in her blogs for the public. She's mentored 8 PhD students and 24 MSc students, and she is our current president for Society of Ethnobotany. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you.
Who you are, maybe your stories and where you are. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you for the introduction. Yes, indeed. I think the introduction was okay. Yes, I'm German and I ended up in Mexico. I don't know if you want me to talk about that. Yeah, it's a kind of a story, and yeah, what should I talk about first?
Your background briefly, and especially your stories, maybe when you're young, your interest in plants.
Yes. Well, I was born in Germany. My parents are Germans. However, my father went to the US for a while to work, so I grew up partially in the US. And I went back as an exchange student also, and then afterwards several times. As a child, I was actually not very interested in plants. I was interested in birds as a young woman. However, once I started studying biology in Braunschweig, which is the hometown of my parents in Germany, I found that if you study zoology, you have to kill and section animals, and I didn't really like that all that much. Also, I liked the botanists there. So my father had always been something of a naturalist. That is, on weekends we would often go for walks in the excursions and walks in the forest and so on. So there was some family influence there too. So I kind of turned to botany. There were also some other influences. The father of a friend of mine sent me to a meeting of botanists that are interested in like vegetation. And I liked that. There were several prominent botanists there at this meeting, and they were discussing there in the forest and in the grasslands on the plants. And I thought that was interesting. So I ended up being a botanist. Then when I was looking for a subject for my undergraduate thesis, I found that I forgot something. And after a couple of years, I decided I wanted to see the tropics, which are very exotic for a German, right? I ended up in the Philippines for a year and took some courses there and collaborated with some projects, and also got to know some anthropologists, which was where I first kind of thought that might be interesting. I also got to know the journal Economic Botany there in the Philippines. And I was reading that and thought, well, that looks pretty good. And then I went back to Germany and continued studying in Bonn and also in southwestern Germany. And I was still more of a plant ecologist, so I already liked weeds in that time. That comes from very far back somehow. However, I found that the botanists in Bonn were all laboratory based. I don't mind laboratories, but I did want to do some field work. So I ended up with a geographer, William Lowe, who has a long history of working in Latin America. And he worked in El Salvador and in Chile, and was also the coordinator of a large interdisciplinary project in Mexico. So when he heard about my life story, he said, would you like to go to Mexico? I wasn't even that enthusiastic about it because it also meant learning another language, which I didn't speak Spanish earlier. However, I thought about it, and in the end I went and studied the flora and vegetation of a village in central Mexico. And then I went back, did some other stuff, had some kids and so on. And 5 years later, I went back to Mexico for my PhD. That was on weed vegetation. It was not ethnobotany. In my undergraduate thesis, I did do some ethnobotany because it was very obvious when I went to the field. I was living with a campesino family there. So when I went to the field, brought back my plants to press them, the senora there, the farmer's wife, would tell me, well, let's go that, and you use it for that, and so on. And so I wrote that down. No? And so I got kind of interested, and also I started attending some meetings of the Botany Society there. And there in Mexico, in contrast with Germany, ethnobotany in that time was already very active and a prominent discipline in botany. Okay, so I came back, did my PhD on weed vegetation in a larger area. And well, then I looked for work, and I worked for a while in a regional university. And there they told me I had to give ethnobotany. So I gave an ethnobotany course. And then later I changed to the institution where I am now, which has a long history of ethnobotany research. That's where I am.
Good, very inspiring short story. Time will not allow to give a detailed story.
Yeah,
and one thing I've seen is the importance of interacting with the people and also attending meetings like this one, which is very important, and having mentors. Yes.
Yes.
And I know you're doing research,
Mm-hmm.
and you are for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And we are students. We have our challenges in our small research.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the challenges that you do face in your research, and maybe how did you overcome them? And what can you advise us students in our research when we have challenges?
Well, I always feel that my main problem in life is lack of time. That is something that you can't really change. So it is quite important to be able to say, this is enough. That is not to want to do everything. I have a lot of problems with not doing everything because I have lots of ideas of things that I would like to do. And my students have a lot of ideas of what they would like to do, but you cannot. So you need to concentrate on answering specific questions. Of course, if you're in the field, you should try to document what you can within the time limits, because you can often use that afterwards, or it gives you new ideas if you think about it afterwards. Perfectionism, or that is trying to be perfect, is really the enemy of doing something good to an extent. Of course, there's some other challenges right now in Mexico. It's become kind of dangerous in a lot of places, so we can't do stuff that we were doing 20 or 10 years ago. And well, that's a problem. In general, the scientific infrastructure here in Mexico is pretty good. That is, we have herbaria, we have lots of the institutions have a reasonable infrastructure. We have a lot of professional societies and so on, which help a lot, no? And people help each other also, as they do, no? And there are lots of good botanists here, so and biologists in general. So that side is not really a problem. Sometimes bureaucracy, but I think everybody is unhappy about spending time with that.
Yeah, that part that you've mentioned on being perfect, as students, we target perfection, but
Yes.
research at times doesn't work as you had intended, and you are demoralized, you are discouraged.
Yes.
Some even quit.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
I think that is very important.
Yes. I
Yeah.
do think that, I mean, not being crazy about doing something that you cannot do, but perseverance is a very important characteristic of a scientist. And I think it's actually a lot more important than intelligence and stuff like that. But really wanting to do something is kind of a necessary. And just doing a scientific degree to get the degree and have it, call yourself a Master's of Science or a doctor or a PhD is not a good reason for that. But there are people who can do it well, and there are people who maybe shouldn't. Because, I mean, for everything in life, you need talent to an extent or a certain mindset. For example, both of my brothers are musicians, no? But I'm hopeless as a musician. I also learned it as a child, but doesn't work. So one does have to think about if you have the the innate curiosity to be able to persevere when the circumstances are not good.
Yeah, so research for a student is beyond graduation, it's beyond the degree, and it calls for a lot of perseverance. Just stay there, stay there, stay there a little more. I think I forgot to tell our members that we are recording this, and we shall upload it for others to view later. So we are recording just for your information. Maybe to be more specific, Prof, those are challenges maybe generally, but most of our audience, most of our students are botany students, and especially ethnobotany. What are these specific challenges that students face or that you face as a researcher in botany, in ethnobotany?
It depends, of course, a little bit on what you work, but it is really important to get a good foundation in methods, in both anthropological methods, but also in botany. At least here in Mexico, a lot of people have the idea that, ethnobotany is just going to the village and talking with people, and do not measure the necessity to know something about plants, which is a serious challenge for a lot of people. I mean, taxonomy is something you need to be involved with for some time before it becomes really useful. You have to learn a lot of stuff. You have to identify plants, which some people think is boring, even though today it's a lot easier than it used to be. And you have to develop an eye for plants and differences between species and so on, for most subjects, not for all subjects, in ethnobotany. So I think you need, for taxonomy, I always thought that people like puzzle solving do good on that, but again, it depends on your subject, but you should consider that ethnobotany has some serious foundations that one should master before starting. If you're doing medicinal plants, of course, you have some serious chemistry that you need to learn before you start your investigation on some interesting plant, no? So it should be seen as a subject that requires good foundations and not an easy way out that I have seen in a number of cases.
Yes, Prof, I agree, because especially on the methods that's the challenging part for us in botany research. I remember when I was doing my PhD, it was more of organic chemistry. I had to attend organic chemistry classes on spectroscopy to get the methods. Thank you. I agree on that. And it really helped me when I was doing my presentations. So, Prof, you told us how you shifted from birds to botany, how you ended up in ethnobotany, but now Society for Ethnobotany. How did you come to know Society for Ethnobotany? How did you become a member? And now you are the president.
Well, yeah, that was kind of surprising, but anyway, yeah. As I said, I got to know the journal. When I got back to Germany from the Philippines, I started subscribing, that is, being a member. That's been already quite a long time. And then when I had an opportunity, I went to a meeting, and this was the kind of community that I liked. So I haven't been to all of the meetings, but I do tend to go. And I got to know a lot of really interesting people. Ethnobotanists in general are quite interesting people, I would say. So I got to know a lot of people, and then sometime they invited me to be a council member first, and then eventually asked me if I wanted to be the president, if I wanted to be a candidate for president. And as you know, we usually have tried to have several candidates, but we don't always do. Because being involved in societies, there are people who don't want that because they feel it is a waste of time. However, they do want to have the services of the scientific societies often. So I do think that we should, as professionals and students, try to get involved, because science is a collective undertaking. I mean, it's not just me sitting, even though I'm alone most of the time sitting in front of my computer, it involves a lot of communication, which can be via papers, but the real good ideas you hear when you're talking to people or going to meetings. No? Meetings are really how would you call that? Continuous education, no? And also, of course, where you throw around ideas and get to know people and see new approaches and so on. It's really important, this social part. You shouldn't exaggerate, of course, like everything in life, but I do think it's an important part of the progress of science, this communication between people, direct communication.
Yeah, meetings are important, and meeting people, that's one of the benefits. And you also mentioned that in Society for Ethnobotany, you met interesting people. What are other benefits that you've gotten as a member of Society for Ethnobotany? And maybe what can you tell others? What are the benefits that they can get as members of Society for Ethnobotany, especially students?
Well, especially students.
Yes.
Well, you can be.
But even others,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, scientific societies usually give you access to a journal. In our case, it's, I think, one of the most important, if not the most important journal in the area. Of course, if you have access to your institution, well, then you don't need it. But you should be willing to support that and some society that is of your country or your region. Also, of course, you get to participate in events, either cheaper or for free. A lot of societies are now doing this kind of events, online events that are make it possible for people all around the world to participate. And again, you meet interesting people. I think that's the most important part in scientific societies, and that you have contacts, that you have people you can ask stuff, and people know you, which also indirectly helps you when you look for work or so on, or citations. I mean, you are more likely to cite a person you know, and you know who works well, and who you have seen in a talk at a meeting, than somebody you don't. I mean, of course, it's not exclusive and so on, but it does work a little bit that way. But mainly it's meeting people and being able to participate in events.
Yeah, research is beyond the lab, it's people, and it's in societies where you meet people and interact, and you build confidence and trust people, and you know what they're doing, and they can
Yes.
help.
As
Now, okay,
trust
yes,
trust is
please.
Trust is an important subject in science. And if you know people personally, it's easier if you know they work well, if they're trustworthy people. That is also plays an important role. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yes. Now, Prof, you said you do research, and we have seen you've gone from the birds to the plants, but now specifically, again, you went to the weeds.
Mm-hmm.
Why going to the weeds?
That's also a story.
Yes.
We're going to start with Walt Disney.
Yes, go ahead, please.
As a child, I used to look at the comics of Walt Disney and some others, and in that time there were like little ads of people looking for. I mean, this all sounds kind of weird in the age of the internet, but ads of people who were looking for pen pals. Okay. So I answered to a lady a young girl, I was about 12 then, answered to a girl in Romania. And she got too many answers and sent my letter to somebody else, to a friend of hers, who in the end turned out to be a lifelong friend of mine. I went to visit her in Romania, like when I was 16 or something like that. And her father was an agricultural botanist who worked at the experimental station there. So we went hiking around the Carpathian Mountains and looking at them pastures and whatnot. And he started to explain stuff to me. And he was interested in weeds because he was an agricultural scientist, no? And that initially got me interested. And also in Germany, in general, people are more interested in secondary vegetation than they are in the US or in the tropics, just mainly because that's the only thing there is. No, there isn't very much primary vegetation in Central Europe. So a lot of the prominent plant ecologists like Heinz Ellenberg wrote a lot about secondary vegetation in his book on the vegetation of Central Europe. And a lot of botanists as such were interested in weed vegetation. Also, there is a long tradition of using weeds as indicator plants and so on. They have pretty good classification also of weed vegetation. So that's mainly the influence. Mm-hmm. And kind of like.
You know, it's because we are used to associate weeds as bad. We don't want the weeds.
Yes.
But even the definition itself on weeds, I realized it's interesting. So, what are weeds actually?
Well, there are several definitions. Yeah, the one that you use most. I think somebody has her microphone open there. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. The main definition that everybody learns is unwanted plant in a place that it is not wanted. That's what the agronomists say. However, it is a type of vegetation. There are some very specific plants that grow as weeds. And so I prefer a definition that weeds are plants that are capable of forming populations in places that are strongly disturbed by human beings. which includes both cultivated fields and rural vegetation. That is what's in urban areas, in rural towns, in field margins, in cemeteries, and all these kind of places. Yeah. So there are several people who define it that way. That's not my idea, no. Also traditionally. So there's that. And there's also the definition that weeds are plants whose virtues have not yet been discovered. Though most weedy plants do have virtues, and they have already been discovered. But it depends on what kind of a system you have, agricultural system. If something is really unwanted or just there and you can use it, even though you didn't cultivate it.
So weeds are not necessarily useless.
No.
They,
If you
okay.
have, yes, there are several examples of that, even in modern agriculture. Weeds, if they don't compete too much with our cultivated plants, cover the soil, avoid erosion, improve soil with organic matter and so on. So there are systems where they are kind of integrated, or where they're tolerated from a certain point onwards. However, in traditional systems, which tend to be mixed, they often play a very substantial role. In Mesoamerica, particularly, where we have these maize fields are different from old world crops, that they are large plants and you can walk around in them, no? So they tend to have intercrops. I mean, there's the famous squash and bean thing, but there are also quite a lot of other intercrops. There may be dozens and even almost 100 other species that, you know, farmers plant there and or tolerate and then use. Weeds also fall into that category. Quite a few of them are edible. People eat them. But even more important now that they have domestic animals that they have to feed, starting with their donkeys and other animals for agricultural work, it can be used as a forage. And some studies we did, we found that this use was as important as the value of the maize grain. Of course, it depends a lot if you have animals, if you don't have animals, and so on. But it may be a considerable part of your agricultural production. Also, another important use is as a bee food. In some areas, there's a very large honey industry here in Mexico, and the flowering plants. There's another thing. A lot of the weedy plants here in Mexico are nice. They look nice. They have nice large flowers. They are pollinated by insect, and a lot of them are obligatorily allogamic. How do you say that in English? So that need cross-pollination, which is different from weeds of other regions of the world. So the bee industry also relies quite a lot on weedy plants. One of the main bee honey producers in Yucatan, for example, is a really weedy plant, but it gives a nice honey and they advertise it as such. So the weedy plant also, of course, in traditional agriculture, they also play this role of covering soil and making the whole thing more sustainable. Of course, you have to weed also. I mean, you can't just let it grow. And weeding is hard work, particularly in the warmer tropics. So people often weigh these two, the work contra the possible benefits that you can have. We've seen that here I live in the highlands, and here the traditional systems often don't use very many chemicals. However, in the warm tropics where it's harder work to weed, people do use a lot of herbicides nowadays that they can afford them. However, it also sometimes leaves some spaces exactly for this use of weedy plants. They leave it without herbicides or without weeding. Maize needs to be by itself, like the first 40 days or something like that. So you need to weed in that time. But afterwards, it's competitive, and weeds don't affect the yield all that much. And you have the additional benefits.
Yeah,
Is that what you wanted to
especially,
know? Mhm.
exactly. Especially where weeds are food, because even here in Africa, there are some societies which a certain plant can be considered as weed in a society, but it's
Mhm.
vegetable or it's
Yes,
food
also, it's
in
a
another
vegetable.
society.
Mhm.
So
Actually,
when I,
uh-huh.
okay, yes,
In
Prof.
Africa, you have similar systems. You originally had like sorghum and also other large cereal plants that have an agronomy that's somewhat similar to maize. And nowadays, maize has more or less taken over in a lot of places, no? But they have the same possibility of using the plants within the field. Actually, I always believed that the milpa is basically the vegetable garden of Mesoamerican farmers. If you look at home gardens, they have very little annual plants. They're mostly perennials, trees, medicinal plants, condiments that you need to have fast. But everything else, like green vegetables and tomatoes and onion, well, we have some indigenous chives here and so on, you have that in your milpa. And you don't really put a lot of work in it either. It grows by itself.
Hmm.
So it's
Hmm.
quite efficient. Mhm.
Yes, because most of these weeds they grow by
By
themselves.
themselves, yeah.
Yeah. Could you shed more on weeds in Mexico? Because Mexico, there's a lot of useful weeds,
Mhm.
and I see time is really short. I wanted you also to speak about how you can manage these weeds, because I planted maize plants, but I found this useful weed. That was not my intention, but I need it.
Mhm.
So I'm like tied on two interests. The plant I planted, and now the useful weed. How do I strike the balance?
Well, that is, of course, the problem with traditional work. Agriculture, it needs more work, more labor, human labor. That is, Mesoamerican farmers weed selectively. That is, species that are, for example, poisonous to their livestock. They really weed them out. And also climbing weeds that may cover the maize, they also are quite aggressive with keeping them out of the fields. If in traditional agriculture, modern agriculture, they become problems. But anyway, so you need differential weeding, which today still requires human labor and some amount of it. It's not as much as some people think, but it is. And I was telling my students nowadays with robots, maybe we will go back to these kind of mixed cultivation, because we can have machines that are solar energy specific weeders of certain species. One thing that we've been seeing is that when people start to use herbicides, a lot of herbicides are selective for broadleaf plants. And then what you have is a lot of grasses left over, which are more difficult to combat. And of course, they compete more with the maize also. So getting rid of all of the broadleaf plants is not really a good idea. You can experiment. I found farmers, rural farmers, who have experimented with promoting certain species that don't grow too big and cover the ground and are useful. So I think we should do more experimentation on this kind of thing as if we work in agriculture also.
Allow me to open to the members to ask questions in the interest of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Daktari.
Yes, Charles, welcome. You can ask your question.
There is something which has not been clear to me. Maybe Prof can have some input. Sometimes what you have just presented as a concern, there's a case whereby maybe I have planted a given crop or a plant of my desire, a crop of my choice. But after germination and sprouting of my crop, it reaches a point whereby some weed seed bank also germinates. Fortunately or unfortunately, some of these weeds are edible to some of us as humans in most of our African societies. Now, how can one strike a balance between the two? That is between the most desired crop and the sprouted weeds which have already germinated after some time, after planting the desired crop. Bearing in mind that there is the main desired crop, and there is the weed seed bank which has germinated, and most of them are edible or can be utilized by other human beings. How can one strike a balance between the two instead of eradicating these weeds so that I remain with my desired crop? How can one strike a balance between the two so that they can, both of them, be allowed to survive in the field?
Yes, that is an excellent question. And as I said, it's difficult to mechanize this kind of thing, at least with the mechanization that we currently have. Yeah. What I would suggest in such a case, Charles, would be to use your usual weeding practices on a part of the field, and the other part of the field perhaps weed by hand where the plants grow, and foment them. The thing is that in a maize field, you will grow a lot more chenopodiums and amaranths and whatever you have as edible weeds than you can eat by yourself. If you have a market, well, then you can use it. But markets are usually somewhat limited for these fresh vegetables, also because they are not very they are not very transportable. They don't have a long shelf life or anything like that. So if you want to sell it, it has to be nearby. And there are limits to those market sizes. So, and the other thing is to experiment, to try to foment some of the useful weed species, take their seeds and throw them around and see if they may start to dominate the other species that are not useful. But it is a rather detailed work that Mesoamerican farmers traditionally do, but that is somewhat difficult to translate into modern agriculture, though we should try. We should do experiments on that. Is that more or less, does that answer the question, Charles? More or less, I suppose.
Yes, Prof. It is well clarified. I really appreciate.
No, thank you for the question.
Welcome, Prof.
Thank you. Any other question? Or comment?
I have a question just about your work, Madam President. Like, so with regards to the ethnobotany side, who do you find yourself interacting with most in your work? Do you interact with commercial farmers? Do you interact with more indigenous communities in Mexico? Do you interact, who are you interacting with? And are you, is there like a problem or a tension between like the weeds and the crops that you work to resolve?
Well, excellent question. First of all, I work at an agricultural institution. So my colleagues are mainly agronomists and botanists. I'm in the botany department. Also, there's one very sad fact of life in academics is that once you get older, you don't go to the field very much. And that is very sad, but it is that way. You just get, flooded with other stuff, and you do your research mainly through your students. And yes, my students, a lot of them actually are of indigenous heritage and come from rural areas, as a lot of them are graduates here of a nearby agriculture university, Chapingo, which has a really interesting system where people do an exam and they get their high school and a university career for free, with including dorms and food and everything. They even get some money. So for a lot of poor rural folks, this is a way to get to a middle-class lifestyle, no? So we get some very both knowledgeable and ambitious people in our postgraduate program. And of course, a lot of them, if they do ethnobotany, they go and study their villages or the village of their parents or their grandparents. So there's a lot of interaction there. And as far as I go, well, I do interact a lot with botanists in my own department and with the Botanical Society also. But here in Mexico, as I said, ethnobotany is a big thing. So there are a lot of ethnobotanists there too. We have a National Association of Ethnobiology, which also has some big meetings. And but I spend my time in front of the computer nowadays mainly. And then sometimes pulling weeds in my garden. I do sometimes eat them, but I have more weeds than I can eat.
So are you interested at all, or is there an interest in your university with taking your work and applying it to more commercial agriculture? Because that is, typically where more of the money is, and so usually, and I think ethnobotany has a lot to offer in remedying a lot of problems in commercial, agriculture, cash cropping methods.
Well, as ethnobotanists, we always talk about that traditional agriculture, if it cannot be applied directly to commercial agriculture because of the higher labor requirements. However, there are elements that can be transferred. But I have to say that that is not the focus of my work. I would like to have more people working on that. My focus has been rather on showing the rationality of traditional agriculture, that people are not stupid. They do the way they do things because that is better for them, as long as labor costs or their alternatives are not that high. So for a poor person, traditional agriculture is a lot more economically rational than modern agriculture. That's something we've seen in various studies. But of course, once you are a mechanic or a taxi driver or have a store or something and you don't have time anymore, then you start to simplify your system. Your time is worth more. And that is when you start, mechanizing, having monocultures and so on, because that is what is most convenient for you. And I think we got to get it into our heads that modern agriculture is not really about productivity, even though the proponents always try to espouse that, no? Because traditional agriculture is pretty productive if you count everything they produce as far as useful biomass goes, but it uses a lot more labor. So modern agriculture is basically substituting labor with chemicals and tractors and whatnot, no? It is quite difficult, important to understand that, and that is basically the focus of my work, to show that traditional agriculture is rational and that people, they experiment. Extension agent goes and tells them, try this variety and so on. They try it and see if it works. It often doesn't. So there's that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was a very interesting question because even we as students, once we do our research and finish, we forget about the research. So there is the aspect where you can commercialize your findings. Yes, there is a hard. Okay, yes, Prof.
No, I'm not. It's not my thing all that much to look for commercialization, really, because me personally, I think that research that is done with public money should be for public benefit. And
Yes.
I think we as ethnobotanists may identify the medicinal plants and the uses people put into, and also concepts of illnesses, which is quite important. And when people tell you some name of an illness, they are often not the same as it is in Western medicine. But I think the development is a thing that should be done rather by commercial entities, no? Where ethnobotanists obviously can go and work. But that's just me. People have other different opinions.
Okay. Tim Allen, you can comment or ask the question.
Okay, hey, I just want to say I appreciate the meeting. This has been very informative. I have like multiple questions, but my first question is for secondary metabolite research, how would a doctorate student who's interested in going that route want to identify a plant to cure like a specific disease or illness? And my second question would be, if you're in a program with limited funding, are there any scholarships that would help students who are pursuing in the field of ethnobotany or like pharmacognosy?
Well, I don't live in the United. I don't know. Where are you based?
I'm based in Puerto Rico.
In Puerto Rico.
Sí.
Well, first, of course, you revise the literature. There's a lot of literature on Mesoamerican medicinal plants, and you will probably find the answer to what plant they use for what illness somewhere in the literature. Then afterwards, there is the problem to get the plant. I don't know what the legislation is in Puerto Rico, but in Mexico, it has become very, very difficult because of the Nagoya Protocol things. You need the consent of the owner of the where you're going to collect. Actually, general collecting is almost impossible legally nowadays. The problem, yes, it is that way.
Wow.
If it's small ownership or even roadsides, you need the permit of the owner, but you also have to prove that the owner is the owner. And
Okay.
that is impossible because nobody will give you the documents that you need to prove that because it can be abused. Yeah. So that is a real problem. However, here in Mexico, we have private ownership, but we also have two forms of collective ownership. And there you can get a document from an assembly or something like that that will allow you to work. And also you can get to an agreement of what to do with possible benefit sharing. However, that also is a problem because people think there will necessarily be benefits, but mostly they are not because things don't work out and whatever. No? So there are quite a lot of problems around the Nagoya Protocol thing that we still have to work out if we want to continue working, because at least the way I see it here, and nobody's collecting anymore. There's very little plant collecting going on right now. What is going on is often por la vía libre, as they say here in Mexico, that is without permits. And some of my students get collection permits, but it is a big hassle. And you don't really do that if you just want a plant or two. Well, that's part of the answer. The other question you asked was if there are scholarships.
And like studentships.
I understand that in the US and UK and so on, there are some scholarships. Here in Mexico, all the postgraduate students get scholarships if they apply to a recognized program. And there are some general scholarships also, Tim, if you want to inquire. For example, here in Mexico, the Foreign Relations Secretary gives, I think, 2 scholarships to every country in the world, something like that.
Okay, wow.
A lot of people don't know about that. And there are some other possibilities, yes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, answered perfectly. Okay, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Trish, do you know about any scholarships in the US?
No, but sometimes if you write to the universities, and certainly if your professor has a grant and that's of your area of interest or research, I think what you bring out, Heike, is that collecting has gotten very difficult. I do collecting around the world, but I'm not asking for intellectual property rights all the time.
Yeah.
I'm asking just for materials that
But even that
and used as references.
Yeah.
And so certain countries is very difficult. Others, it's a little simpler, and it depends on the amount that you're collecting. So it's a problematic area, which really limits our research nowadays. So I think it's a concern, but I would suggest, talking to professors in areas where you want to go, Tim, and see what kind of possibilities they have, because every university is a little different.
Mm-hmm. Also, I want to add that the Society for Ethnobotany and the other societies are usually not very rich. Let's say it that way. We do help some students with like registration fees that is competitive in our meetings. So we do try to support students to an extent, but we don't have that much.
We have the Schultes Award, which is more of a deeper study. I think it's $5,000, maybe. I can't remember what the cost is, but that is for research in the field, unlike presentations and awards that will help you on your resumes and when applying for jobs or even positions in academic areas. So please do look at the website for the Society of Ethnobotany and look at the Schultes Award if you're interested. And sometimes there's other awards as well.
Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot to talk about that a while ago. We do have some awards, but and the Schultes Award is the one with the best highest awards, no? But, and they are on our website, yes. But in general, yeah, one has to look at every country and how science works there. No? Okay.
And one last comment is, I find that if you attend the meetings, that is the conversation that you will have with your peers, other students. And it is a
Yes.
great place to find out how they got a grant or how they got to a department. It's really rich in that sense, is to come to the meetings and to participate there. So I just, want to make that really strong statement, because that's what I've heard from a lot of students.
Yes,
That's-
that's one of the reasons why you should go to meetings, because there you hear about stuff that doesn't come in the papers, practical stuff, and the contacts. And
Yes, and that's why we are having these cafes, like the story Prof was given about the birds. You won't hear that on papers.
yes, exactly.
Yes. Yes, Prof, our time is up. But before we leave, maybe your advice to students, especially in botany, as we wind up, and your final thoughts.
Well, it's useful if you know about plants and if you like them. Yeah, and people also. I mean, as an ethnobotanist, you need to talk to people. So it is quite important that you feel comfortable and you like people. Yeah, not everybody does. And the thing is that plants and people are kind of different domains, no, as they say. And you should ask yourself if you are comfortable with both of them. Also, you need to be comfortable, and that is something they share with anthropologists, is to be alone in a different culture often. And that is not so easy. And everybody comes to the point where they said, why the hell did I do this? Why am I here? Why am I eating and sleeping in places that may not be so comfortable or whatever? If I could have a lot more comforts of home and do something else, and that may be worth more money also. So you do have to ask yourself that. I mean, it's normal. It is really normal to feel lonely sometimes when you're in the field, and you should be aware of that.
Thank you, Prof. And I want to finish. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the mentorship to the entire SEB community and your support. And thank you for accepting this. It was a last-minute ambush, but it's been excellent. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Watch out for our next cafe. Same place on Zoom. It will be usually last week of the month. So last week, next month, we will be there. Thank you.
Yes, Charles, invite more people to join the society. It's quite cheap as a student. So please. And if you can get a mentor or somebody to it's $10 or something and the start. Later, it's a little bit more expensive, but not really for an international society. Yeah? So I do would like to ask everybody to consider joining the society. Okay.
Yes. There are many benefits, as you mentioned. So we thank everyone and we welcome to join the society, especially the students. And thank you, Prof, once more, and thanks to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. I see some comments here, Douglas, in the chat.
Maybe if I may read, this Savannah, she was very grateful about the answer. She wanted to hear about the act of your work and the role it plays in the world. There is also from Maria. She's very grateful for these cafes. They are very inspiring. There is Trish also on the newsletter. She's our newsletter person we have. And also this from Tim Allen, very grateful. This from Charles, very informative and inviting more students to attend. There is Alex Green, thanking you, Prof. There is this one, maybe Prof. it's in it's in your language. I could not read it.
Oh, really? Ya, podrían compartir la grabación. How do you call it? It will be available in the SEB website, right?
Yes.
The video,
Yes.
or where is it going to be?
Yeah, there is even an email there. So people are grateful and we thank you, Prof.
Oh, well, I thank you.
So let's end it there and all the best.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.